This is Curious Incident, a podcast for special needs families and your window into the world of special education. Special needs parenting can be challenging, and we want to make it easier by providing you with the resources you need to help your child. Let's delve deep into the world of learning differently with your host, special education attorney Adam Dayan.
It is my great pleasure to present a wonderful group of people from Repertorio Español as my next guest on the Curious Incident podcast. Repertorio Español is a Spanish repertory theater in the heart of Manhattan that makes available high-quality theater that speaks to the Latinx community's diverse cultures, traditions, and heritage while promoting the work of emerging artists and expanding access to the next generation of artists and audiences, including both general education and special education students. This theater has a very special place in my heart because I first visited it with my high school Spanish class more than 20 years ago and have stayed connected to the theater ever since, now having the honor of serving as one of its board members for the last 6 years. Joining me for today's conversation are Robert Federico, founder and executive producer emeritus. Robert joined the company full-time in 1972. He has created sets, lighting, and costumes for over 100 productions for the theater, and he is most proud of bringing theater to over 800,000 students in the course of his tenure, spearheading the company's outreach efforts to schools. Allison Astor-Vargas, Manager of Special Projects and Education. Allison coordinates all the educational residencies and professional development sessions with schools, as well as oversees and participates in the collaboration between the schools, classroom teachers, and Repertorio's teaching artists. She also produces all student performances that take place at the theater. And Daniela Thome. Daniela is an actor, writer, and director based in New York City who has worked as bilingual educator for over 25 years. She has also worked as a teaching artist incorporating theater into schools in all 5 boroughs of New York City. Together, we will be discussing the subject of adapting theater to students and special needs individuals. Robert, Allison, Daniela, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
So Repertorio does so much work with schools and students. Can you talk a bit about that work?
It all began with a very simple phone call back in 1968. A teacher called up asking for if there were student discounts. And our producer and founder, Gilberto Zaldivar, thought, oh my goodness, there's a market for our productions for students. And that's how our whole educational program began, even though in a very streamlined, simple way at that time. It was just doing classic plays essentially for students who were learning Spanish or Latino students. And it was very simply, teachers would buy group sales or group tickets, and the performances were scheduled at that time at 12 noon for the students, and that was it. And that happened throughout the 70s, I would say. Thereafter, thanks to teachers basically suggesting things or requesting things, we started to expand the program. For one thing, we started doing 11 a.m. performances because the teachers said, well, the school buses have to be back at the schools to pick up the students by 3 o'clock. So a lot of the revisions that we made to the program were in response to what teachers had asked for. And teachers, one time when we started doing contemporary plays that were not as familiar as Calderon or Lopez plays, the classics, or Garcia Lorca, we did study guides so that the teachers had at their hand information about these plays, interviews with the director, of course, and if the author was still alive, otherwise biographies of the playwrights, so that they had a handy tool for using the performances in their classwork, not just buying tickets and coming to see a performance, but sort of incorporating the work in the classwork, so they'd read the play beforehand, hopefully, and then discuss it after the performance. And that led to us initiating introductions before the plays at the theater. So start with a short little introduction, which tried to involve the students as quickly as possible into what was going to happen in the play, in case the teachers hadn't worked with the students before or prepared them. And to get them to see the people on stage as live people, because a lot of times students were used to film, and they could be unruly because they didn't realize that, when you watch a film, no matter how you react in the movie house, it doesn't affect the quality of the film. But if you're unruly in a live theater, the actors hear you. And so the introduction part was to get them involved in the story and in the production, to try to make it relevant to the students that were there, whether they were Latino or not Latino, but also to make them realize these actors are live on stage. They can hear you. So try not to be too bad, And then after the performance, to give them a opportunity to ask questions about the production. So the study guides and the question and answer and the introduction came about sort of in the mid-'80s to help the teachers make it a full experience. And that's how it developed. But most of the time it developed in response to what teachers had requested and suggested. And there was one suggestion that was done once and then never done again. A teacher said, well, the students would love a backstage tour, and tried to do it, and our backstage is non-existent, but I took everybody upstairs to the dressing room area. And when our producer, Gilberto, saw 30 people on our stairs going up to the dressing room area, he had such a fear that the whole stair was going to collapse because we're in a building that's over 150 years old, that he said, never do that again. So that was one thing that we never did again. But that's how it slowly developed. And in the 90s, a wonderful woman from the New York State Council on the Arts came up to us and requested that we develop a program to go into schools where there was a big Latino population. Because although other theaters were doing arts and education and doing workshops in schools, none of them were done in Spanish. They were obviously always in English. And she said there is a huge population that could benefit from you doing the same thing, but in Spanish. And that's how we began. The first teacher was Michael John Garces, who now runs the theater in Los Angeles. And I did a few myself at the very beginning. And we just went into schools and tried to develop program where the students were asked to write or create works, so that it worked into the classwork of not only public speaking and working together in cooperation with one another, but also to develop their creative talents. Because one of the principles, and I remember him very clearly stating, the schools oftentimes don't prepare or don't try to find the creative elements of the students. They're preparing them for the least creative work. And he ran actually a small, when the schools broke up, one that was primarily for business. And he said, business is an art. And he wanted the Repertorio to be involved in it because he thought doing theater in his school, even though it was meant for business people, was a wonderful way for them to create, work together, public speak, and get them out of their shells so that they have a much more creative element to it.
It was part of their curriculum to be part of this group virtual enterprise, so they would create a business and they would be a fair, and the students had to pitch their business. So we brought in a teaching artist, and this might have been done in English or Spanish, but I'm pretty sure this one was in English, and give them the tools to improv, do concentration games, and to do these I am poems so that they would learn how to perform. And this would help them sell their virtual enterprise.
Right.
That was one of the earliest residencies that we had.
So many applications for theater and so many ways in which it can help you develop your skills, whether it pertains to business or acting or
writing, how to write a scene that's plausible, that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and how to present that scene. A lot of other theater companies have great arts and education programs, but we do something that a lot of them don't, and that is allow the students to perform their written works. That's very powerful for them to hear their writing, their voice, to emote. We've heard from so many students in high school, oh, I haven't been in a play since kindergarten, or I've never done this before. So when we go into a school, we are working with a population that is underserved with the arts, and we're giving them this first opportunity to have a hands-on experience with theater.
In the past, let's talk about adapting theater to special needs individuals. I know that in the past you've adapted performances to blind and deaf students. Can you talk about how you've done so?
When we were able to install simultaneous translation through individual screens in front of each seat in the theater, it was the first time that we were able to do simultaneous English and Spanish translation. The system allowed us to do in either, that deaf people could read at the same time that the performance was happening. So that was our first introduction to be able to help people who had hearing deficiencies. When, thanks to Montclair State University.
Before we get to Montclair State University, how did that go? How was it received by the deaf students?
It was a very positive outcome because we were then we had potential for audiences who did not come to the theater before because it was difficult if they couldn't hear the text and there was no way of reading it. Because prior to that we had simultaneous translation, but it was all through headsets, and people would hear English but through a headset at the same time the actors were speaking Spanish. So that wasn't really helpful. When we had the screens installed, not only was it good for people who wanted the simultaneous translation into English, but there was also the option to have it in Spanish too. So obviously that opened us up to a much greater world. And when we were doing, I was doing research with a wonderful person who helped us, and her niece was deaf, so she had a lot of background. She was public relations, and she was helping us reach out to the community. And the surprising thing was she said, well, deaf people love musicals. And I looked at her and I thought, wow, that would have been something that I would have never thought of in the whole. And she said, yes, they feel the vibration, and they go along with it, and they enjoy it. And it was something that I would have never thought about in terms of the reach out. So, yes, we were helped that way.
Something that I would not have thought about either, that they're enjoying the vibrations that they're feeling while they're watching the performance.
Yeah, and I have to admit now when I go to musicals on Broadway, I myself realize I just don't like the melody. I love the energy and the vibrations that come through the stage, through the speakers, and the movement. So I understand, yes, that's enjoyable, even if you don't hear the melody itself.
That's so interesting. And you were about to talk about Montclair State University.
Yes, they obviously there were always blind people who came to Repertorio because they could hear the performances. But Montclair set up a way that we could expand our service a little bit on certain performances, where
for blind people,
where they actually made a small model of the set, and they said before the show, have the students or the audiences, because this was also for adult audiences, touch the set so they can feel around what they are. Bring down a costume or two that they can feel and feel the texture, the weight, some props that would be integral to the production that they can also touch and feel. And in that way, when they're listening to the play, they also have an idea of what's happening. And at the same time that the translation is going on, they're wearing headsets where somebody is describing to them the action of the play. So when so-and-so enters, or when they have a sword fight, or whatever is something visual that's important, they're getting the description on the headsets. And they also know the sense of the scenery, the sense of the costumes, the sense of the props, and they get a better appreciation of what is happening on stage.
Did you get feedback about those performances? How did those go?
Very well. I mean, we do at least one or two performances of those for each production that we do, and it's been very well received. I mean, they're very grateful, and we're very happy that we're able to do something, because we just want to reach out to everybody and serve everybody that we can. And each of these incremental steps over our 50-plus year history has been important. So, yes.
Have you thought about ways in which you might adapt your performances to individuals who have different kinds of challenges, such as autism or sensory processing disorders?
Well, that's what we're in the process now of doing. And just like everything else that we've done in the past, from study guides on, we count on the input of the teachers who are directly involved to help us, to guide us, to challenge us into how we can use theater in these special different needs.
And I'll just say, Robert, I suspect there are going to be some schools listening to this episode. So do you want to speak directly to them? What sort of feedback or input would you need from them about what makes this type of performance work for the theater to be able to adapt to individuals who have these challenges?
Well, I think the first thing is to contact us and let us know how they think they could use theater in their classroom or in their organization. So the first step is to contact Allison, actually, and to meet with Allison and let her know what the school or the class, what degree of special needs, because we're talking about a wide spectrum now, and take it from there, because some of it may mean performance, some of it could actually be in writing and creating, some of it may be in different aspects of theater, just maybe coming to the theater and having a session in the theater, learning about theater. There's such a wide possibility there that we're not saying no to anything. We're open to doing anything that the Repertorio possibly can do. So the first thing is to contact the Repertorio and say, we'd like to meet with you, and then discuss what would be the needs of that class or that student body. And from there, Allison can work with the teaching artists, especially with Daniela, who's here today, in terms of working out a program and how Repertorio can be helpful.
And I think it's wonderful that you are willing to produce those bespoke performances for distinct populations. I hope this will be the start of more communication between your theater and theaters in general in schools, so we can get more of these performances going. And since you mentioned Allison, I'll use that as a segue. Hello, Allison.
Hello.
Do you want to respond to anything Robert said, or talk about how often you bring your theater company to schools, and how do the shows presented on site at the schools differ from the shows presented at the Repertorio Theater itself?
Sure. We generally we tour, I would say, 4 to 6 times a year to a public school, usually in New York City, but it can be in Long Island, Jersey, Westchester. We use whatever they have in the air in terms of the lighting, in terms of the sound, which is usually not as good as what we have in the theater. But our tech staff, our production staff, they do a wonderful job of adapting whatever technical capabilities are in the building to present the play as close to the Repertorio experience. Also, for the schools, when we do go there, they can bring many more students. We have a smaller theater. We encourage them to, if you're going to bring us, fill her up as much as you can. And it's less time for them to be out of the building. So we come in, we set it up, we do it. And we were just at a school.
Much more convenient.
More convenient, and that's the difference. We were at a Brentwood High School last Friday. We did 2 shows, and we have a small window because their school day is, it starts at 8:30 and it ends at 2 o'clock. So by 2 o'clock, we have to get those 2 performances in. And I think 1,200 students saw La Gringa twice last Friday.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's wonderful. And again, it's all about participation and inclusion, which is, I think, the heart of the Dignidad education program, whether it's performances or the residency program. We just want to include everybody.
Wonderful.
I think one of the things that makes that easy is that Rene Buch, the founder, who is the director of many of our productions, also found he liked minimalist theater. So the productions are usually very simply designed and directed, which makes touring rather easy. We don't have to go with a lot of scenery or a lot of props. And because we do rotating repertory at the theater, and we're constantly changing the scenery and doing different shows day after day, that it makes it easier. So you can think of it in terms of regular theater companies who have big, heavy productions. Our productions, to begin with, are light enough so that they travel well.
And as you've said, the essence is the connection between the people on the stage or behind the work and the audience anyhow.
Yeah, it's a good story with an audience, and that's the most important thing.
So, Allison, you mentioned Dignidad. Daniela, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. In terms of the shows are all in Spanish, right? So how does it work when you go to a school? Is it just for students that are studying Spanish, or do you guys?
No, we bring our translation system wherever we go.
Oh, okay.
So for native speakers, heritage speakers, and those learning Spanish, they all can enjoy the show and participate in that. And then again, as Robert said, there's study guides, so the teachers can prepare them
Right.
for the play, as well as there's questions and background information on the playwright.
So you do like super titles?
We do the super titles.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Wherever we go.
It's
our new thing.
Thanks for letting me jump in there.
Of course. So, Allison, you mentioned Dignidad. Talk a little bit more about that program and the workshops you conduct at schools.
Right. So, Dignidad meaning self-esteem. We do culturally relevant theater because our work is in Spanish. It is a hands-on theater residency, improvs, acting exercises, writing exercises, and the goal is to have the students prepare a scene, either based on a theme they're working on in class or a short story, a play that they're studying. So we're enhancing the given curriculum as opposed to, okay, stop, we're going to do theater now. So we work very closely with the classroom teachers to really take a dig into the work with the students, and many of our students, they are learning English as a second language, so we're usually pushing into the Spanish class and bolstering their Spanish literacy and public speaking, as well as their creativity. So at the end of, let's say, 10 sessions, working in groups, they've created these original scenes. Sometimes they're on immigration or whatever theme, Bernada Alba, being sequestered. That was a big one after the pandemic, dealing with that issue. In the time of the butterflies, talking about these brave women who went against the dictator Trujillo in the Dominican Republic. So they do their version of the play or a particular scene. And the last session, they present it in front of an audience, either another class or their parents. And that's very powerful, that they get to complete the scene and do it themselves on stage.
I don't think I've seen that one yet. I may have to drop by.
You should.
So 10 sessions, do you want to talk a little bit about the activities that happen during those sessions and how the 10 weeks are culminated?
Right. Every teaching artist has their own bag of tricks. And it's usually the first one is an introductory. And I hear from my teaching artists who, they write a report, tell me how it goes, what are the challenges and successes. Well, they didn't want to improv, they were a little reluctant, and then slowly but surely they come around to doing these improvs that feed the theme of whatever they're going to be working on. Little by little, it's like I can see it happening, and I think for the students, they're not sitting down and just writing. They're active. They're performing, and they're making jokes, and little by little they're directing. I couldn't hear you. You need to be louder. Like towards the end when they're getting ready, it's like they take on the responsibility of learning their lines, making the scene cohesive, and how to cheat out, and so people can see them on stage. So it's the very basics of theater that get taught throughout the 10 sessions, and then they will bring in some props, costumes, not fully costumed, but enough to make a suggestion of who their characters are. And they talk about character development. They talk about projection, so people can hear you, and to be seen. Those are like the 3 basic acting lessons.
And at the end, they get to present in front of an audience, correct?
That is correct. And there's a lot of fear in there. I've seen the dress rehearsal, and then they pull it together for the performance, and it's really amazing. And then afterwards, they're so excited because they can't believe they've done it. And it's really, theater is collaborative, so it's a really great opportunity for not only to expand their creativity, but we see a lot of social and emotional growth with the students.
Feel the fear and do it anyway. Was it you, Daniela, who said that title?
Yes, that's a quote I often have in my mind, and I think that's the essence of performing, you know. And in this case, it really applies that the kids are sometimes very nervous or scared, and then, you know, and there might be a kid that's like really doesn't want to act, or it's like going to be traumatic. Then they can be someone who could be like the assistant director or the, you know, quote, stage manager, or help if there's time to. I've never really done much with like a backdrop, but like maybe, or if there's props or something, like be in charge of like helping with the production or drawing something or a program or something like that. So we're not going to traumatize a student who's severely like major stage fright or something like that, but there are ways to work with it. I'm working in another classroom right now where they're actually working on podcasts.
Oh, cool.
And we were rehearsing it yesterday, and one girl who's very shy was like, she couldn't talk at first when they were interviewing each other, but then I had them sort of turn their chairs towards each other because they're practicing in front of the rest of the class. And then eventually, she relaxed, she opened up, and she had a really interesting story to tell. We work with whatever the teacher wants to do. Like oftentimes it is a piece of literature. Sometimes it can be more creative, like imagining the future, or it can be related to a play they're seeing at Repertorio. And I had 2 kids, remember, from the school in the Bronx, or 3 kids, that I actually invited them to perform an original scene with the Working Theater Director Salon downtown, and they did it from an original scene they created in one of the programs.
So I do have some follow-up questions,
sure.
But Robert, did you want to add something?
Well, a lot of times after they perform at the schools for their peers, we have performances at Repertorio on a Saturday morning, so they can invite their parents, who oftentimes are working during the week, so that they do it again, so their parents can see it. And that's really special. That's really special. But yes, one time one school went all the way, and they even started raising money from local businesses and doing posters and audience development. They went all the way up. Public relations, audience development, fundraising. They did the whole thing.
That's amazing.
Regardless of whether they get an opportunity to come to Repertorio and do their work, or they do it in the library or the auditorium, which is sometimes a little scary for them, the most important thing is that they do what they can and that they feel successsul at it.
Important.
Yeah, we encourage them the whole way. One of my teaching artists, Nicauri Rodriguez, she always says, I feel like a dentist because it's pulling teeth at the beginning, but they always pull it together.
So you have an in-school special needs program that Allison has created. I believe you refer to it as residency. Allison, Daniela, can you tell us more about residency?
Well, let me start by saying, reiterating what Robert was talking about before. In the creation of that program, where I'm talking to the assistant principal who's looking for an artistic outlet for her students with disabilities who didn't have that opportunity. And in speaking about this is what we do, and it's sometimes literature based, in talking with her and the classroom teacher, Alyssa Verdi, who's our point person at PS 373, it was clear that wasn't going to work that way. So we came up with, well, what will work? What can we do that is hands-on creative for the students? And that's how we came up with using music and dance, choreography, even drawing for this group of students. And Daniela can give you more details about that. And we've been in that school since like 2019 for the most part, and it's worked wonderfully. And we have to learn how to go into that special classroom and serve the students. We have to meet them where they are. We have to discuss what are the challenges the students have. Some are nonverbal, some have mobility issues. And, you know, just in general, we have to educate ourselves before we go into the classroom. There's a lot of literature out there, and recently the DOE had a workshop. There's various workshops out there, and you know, it's for teachers and teaching artists, and mostly it was very good, but it was about, okay, how are we feeling, and how do we speak to them about how they're feeling. And that's something that I, as an administrator, I may not have thought of before, and I'm sure you deal with that on the daily when you're in there. And I just remember that the first year that we were in the school, the feedback I got was tremendous, because the parents were overwhelmed in a good way. They never had an opportunity to come to the school to see their kids do any kind of performance. So we want to keep giving them that. It's good for the parents, it's good for the students, and the classroom teachers really enjoy this residency.
Thank you, by the way, for making it accessible to more students.
Yeah, that's what we try to do.
Yeah.
So, Daniela, we're really lucky to have you here with us. You teach the residency at PS 373 at Public School 58 in Staten Island. Can you walk our listeners through that program from your perspective?
So before I even go in the classroom, we meet on Zoom, like we do with all the residencies. Before it was in person, but now we've adapted to using Zoom. And we basically, talk about what we're going to do, finalize the schedule, our goals and the theme. And the basic, goal is, as Allison mentioned, is we have a performance, you could call it, where it's sharing of the dances, right? And we are able to invite parents. There was a couple years where we couldn't because of the pandemic. And basically, it's usually about 8 sessions. I go twice a week. I usually work with 3 to 4 classrooms. And the first session is basically me doing a simple warm-up and some movement exercises to see how the kids move, what they're capable of doing. Every class is different. Every kid is different. So I'm not going to impose, we're going to do these certain steps. Like it's a little bit like, okay, let's just move our heads. Let's move our shoulders, to warm up different parts of the body. And then we do some movement in the room, like, let's walk, and now let's skip, and now let's jump or bounce, and see if people can do it. And most of the students can do some form of these exercises. And then I give them a chance to move somewhat freely. This year I brought in a drum, so we moved to a drum so I can control the rhythm, the speed, and we practice freezing to it. And so that's sort of the routine in all the sessions, like a warm-up and some movement exercises. And the first one, we also play some potential songs that we're going to dance to. By the end of the class, me and the teacher, and with input from the kids, we might have decided on a song. The teacher might already have some ideas. I might have some ideas. Definitely by the second session if we haven't figured it out yet. And then on my own, I start based on what I've seen the kids' abilities and comfort level. I think of choreography to the song, And then starting in the next few sessions, we, along with after the warm-up and exercises, we do the choreography and practice it. And sometimes it's very simple. The teacher might say in a certain class, just want 2 to 3 moves, because that's, you know, some of the kids can't do maybe the moves that well, but they're going to try, and we practice it over and over. And there are, in a couple classrooms, there's a kid that's fully blind, another 2 girls who I think have, you know, some issues with vision. Some might not be able to do it, and sometimes they have a para helping them, or that we might give them an instrument to play, like a drum or a shaker. But over time, with the repetition and stuff, usually all the kids are involved in some way, and they even if they're not doing, it's not necessarily about doing the exact movement, it's just about all of us moving together, you know, at the same time to the same song with a positive message. There's always a kid in one class who might already know the song and is singing along, or as we practice it with certain words that people might sing. I sometimes sing along, but it's mostly about the movement and moving together and having fun, you know, and that's basically it, you know, just to have fun and experiencing the words that are positive, and the idea of moving in our bodies in a positive way, getting out of our seats, standing up, and just like playing, you know, is different for them, and it's exciting.
Definitely sounds exciting. And all of the classrooms that you're teaching at PS 373 are special needs, special education classrooms,
yes,
correct?
Yes, that's right. It's like a whole little school, just special needs students.
And what ages or grades are you working with?
Yeah, so it depends. Every year is a little different. But this year, I'm not even sure the exact grades, but I think it's like kindergarten through about 5th grade. So there's multi-ages in some of the classrooms. But yeah, it's all elementary students. Okay,
and I'm not sure if you said this, but are the sessions taught in English or Spanish or a combination?
At this school, all the class, the teachers and the class instruction is in English. So I do teach the moves in English, and the songs are in English. If there's a student who might not be responding and has a Latino name, I might ask the teachers, like, do they speak Spanish? And I try to talk to them in Spanish too, which I've noticed sometimes it seems like there's a connection there. You know, a lot of the kids, or not a lot, but a good portion of them don't talk a lot, or might make noises or say a word or two, but not very verbal. But music, again, is a way to connect, I think, with everybody.
I just want to add that during the pandemic, Daniela went above and beyond. She set up her phone, her camera, and she did the choreography on tape, and they did their sessions through Zoom, so we were able to continue. And the parents were involved too, so the parents could rehearse with them the movement, the songs, and it gave them all a sense of routine that we really needed at that moment. And it was one of the few residencies that we completed at that time, and that was a good experience for them too.
Yeah,
suffice to say, the pandemic was a horrible time. You have some of these silver linings. For example, the way we learned to use technology. You just gave one example, and during the pandemic, you were able to reach students remotely so that they could work on their choreography at home. And I'm sure that this has given you all sorts of new ways of reaching students around the world, or at least in theory, you could be providing this instruction through choreographic recordings for children who are far, far away.
True. True. There's a lot. I think we were anxious to get back to in person, but that's so very true. And it has a lot of applications. That's something we certainly can explore.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I was going to ask you, Daniela, about the kinds of issues that the students in your classrooms present with. I think we covered that. You mentioned some of the issues before.
Yeah.
Are we good there, or are there any clarifications that you think we need to make?
I think we're good. I mean, they often, one challenge is that some of them might be taken out of the classroom for different services like speech or OT, that a specialist comes and take them out for half an hour or something like that. I don't know I don't see their records, and in a way that's good. I'm not like bogged down with, this student has this disability or this issue. You see, and there are some that are very verbal and some that aren't. Some need help, going to the bathroom and like basic things. And so, yeah, get a wide variety.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what support can be provided to students who require more support?
I mean, in terms of the movements and stuff, like we might try something like in one class that is probably they're Mrs. Franzeb's class. They're usually the oldest kids, and they're a little more verbal and able to do. We do a little more complex choreography in that class usually. There's one girl who like starts screaming sometimes, and I guess it's if certain things are changed or she can't do a movement or that she feels the stress. So we had gotten even some help from another teacher who'd been a cheerleader, like, can you help us with the beginning? And she works at the school, and she came in and she was like, why don't we do a step, turn, step, clap here? Which is a pretty, a little complicated, but some of the kids turning is fine, but and then we did it step, turn, clap, and step, turn, clap the other way. And this girl did it a few times, but then she started screaming, and we're like, what, let's skip the turn. Let's just do step, 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 clap, step, 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 clap. So it's just a little more simple. I'll also try sometimes like going one-on-one to each kid. Okay, let's try. Can you do this move? Can you do this with your hands and come back down? Like sometimes just giving them individual time is very helpful. I think everyone wants individual attention, even adults, right? We all need our time. So I think that helps a lot. And yeah, like I said before, there was a kid in one class that the para was like, I don't think this kid's gonna be able to stand up and dance. Like he'll just run away or something. He needs to stay seated, but the parents will want him to be involved. How can we keep him involved? And that's what we're talking about. Like, okay, let's give him like shakers or the drum so he can be doing something. With the pre-K group last year I worked with, some of them had a lot of mobility issues, and so the teachers thought, let's best just keep them in chairs, but we're still moving, like chair dancing. And we did a lot of tapping on our legs and using our arms, so they could still do a dance but not feel like this pressure that for some of those kids standing up for a whole minute or two is too much, So just adapting to wherever, like Allison said, whatever the needs are and the abilities, like it's just supposed to be fun for them, And in other group that have a lot of a small class, we were just holding hands with the kids the whole time in a circle pretty much and doing really simple movements.
Yeah, and I was going to follow up regarding the nonverbal students. I know you said some of the students you work with are nonverbal.
Yeah.
So how can they benefit?
Well, I think, again, it's hard to gauge, but they smile, they hug me, or they get excited. They might not talk a lot, but they might remember we're in the song. So I think they benefit from a way that they can tap in, that they don't feel, like, I have to fill out this worksheet, or I have to answer questions, and there's no like test, I don't know how it works the whole day when I'm not there, like what kind of assignments they have or how they gauge progress.
But you know what? There's so many studies and stories about the ways in which music bypasses certain language neurostructure in the brain, and so you're helping them access parts of themselves that maybe they can't do through language.
Yes. For example, too, I ran into another student that I had 2 years ago, and he was very enthusiastic and singing along, but again, not the most verbal conversationalist. But he saw me because they were selling snacks in the hallway, and he immediately started doing part of the dance and singing part of the dance.
That's great.
And
That's
I was
great.
singing with him, and this was a song from 2 years ago. So muscle memory gets in your body. You remember these things, and you can immediately tap into it. And so my hope is that, we do use some songs that might be well known, and like they could find those songs again, hopefully, and listen to them, and hopefully the dance. Like I still remember choreography from when I was like 8 years old doing ballet class or something, like certain things, so we all remember these moments in our lives, like like when you first rode a bike, if you were able to ride a bicycle, or certain things that happen to you that are in your body. So by being a joyous experience, sometimes they might be, all of us, all kids at school or at work, we have to sit down a lot, and it can be hard on our body, but getting up and moving is for most people a fun experience, hopefully.
I just had a flashback to a Carly Simon song. It's coming around again. I think it's called. My dad used to play that in the living room of my childhood home all the time. And anytime I hear it today, it's like those memories keep come flooding over me. And so I think music has powerful effects.
Totally, yeah.
Daniela, do the sessions happen in the classroom or in an auditorium or some other place?
The sessions happen in the classroom. Sometimes it is crowded. We try to have the final presentation in the auditorium, which has been a struggle because they're inside of this bigger school. PS 373 there's some administrative challenges there with can they get the auditorium or not, and when. So this year we just got word, I don't know if you saw that email, but we are doing it in the auditorium this Monday morning. So that's very exciting. Last year we performed in the cafeteria, which the teachers decorated a section of the wall, and parents came, and it was nice. But the auditorium is a lot of these schools have these gorgeous auditoriums that are huge. And I mean, my worry is, are the kids going to get nervous there? But they've performed there in the winter, I guess, with their own concert. So hopefully in the auditorium, yeah. And it would be great if they had access to a larger space to rehearse in, to be frank, sometimes. But we move the desks around and make space.
Talk a little bit more about the skills that you help your students build. We were talking about this a little bit in the beginning of the episode. Talk a little bit more about what they work on.
Well, I think, I guess it's, there's a lot of different skills, like, I'd say, I don't know if memorization is the right word, but like practicing moves, order, rhythm, speed, so body motor skills, cooperation, as you mentioned, because they're an ensemble together.
Collaboration, doing, being together, trying to do it as one.
Yes, at the same time. Right. When the song starts, sorry if I...
No. Yeah.
And even literacy skills, because some of the songs we can listen to, and they have the lyrics, and they're learning the lyrics if they play the song on the YouTube. The teachers use YouTube a lot. You can see the lyrics sometimes too. So reinforcing that.
Yeah, I mean, these are all so important, and I'm thinking particularly of self-esteem and public speaking and collaboration. I mean, those are important in whatever line of work you're in or any field that you pursue.
Right. And the after effects of performing and getting through it, a lot of kids feel relief, they feel joy, and they feel like they've accomplished something.
Courage. It builds courage because you're feeling that fear you're facing it and pushing through, you're accomplishing something, and then you look back and you feel good about what you accomplished.
And it's sort of an out of the box experience in terms of schooling, right? So, they're not behind a desk, they're not filling out a worksheet, as Daniela said. They are doing something very physically and mentally and emotionally active, and that's what theater brings to the students.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What are the goals for student success?
In general, is to, we look at how far they've come. The teaching artist is really the gauge of that, from being shy and not speaking up to actually committing to doing their scene or writing. I think that's the real gauge, and we do surveys, and we hear things like, I didn't think I could do it, and it's not easy. It's not easy to do theater, but I can do it. That's the main goal, and that they, the work of an actor or a playwright, for example, is you go back to those 5 W's, which is what you learn in school when you're learning how to read or when you're learning how to create an essay or what have you. There are skills here that, they can take with them when they leave that classroom. So I hope for the students at PS 373, excuse me, that, they take this joyous music, the positivity of the activity, and then they learn how to process their emotions doing this choreography and the song, and they take it with them. And I think that's a great story, that the student 2 years later remembers the choreography and connects you with that work.
There's the great benefit when we go into the schools is if we can discover any artistic bent in any of the students and make them realize, oh, I can do this. I could write something original. I maybe can act. Maybe I can. That would be the cherry on top of a delicious sundae if the student discovers they can do something creative. And that's a very important part. We may not see it at the end of these residencies, but in the future we may have great writers and directors, actors who come out of a program and said, yeah, the first time I did something was one of these residencies of Repertorio.
Daniela, is it a one semester or one school year sort of experience for students, or do you get to work with a group of students over an ongoing period?
Great question. So it's usually about 1 to 2 months. In the springtime we've been doing it. But like I said before, I have some of the same students now that I've seen 2 years or 3 years. So that's great. Like a lot of the students in Mrs. Franzep's class this year, I've had last year. So they even were doing some of the dance moves when I came in the first day, to the song we did last year. So that's great for me as well.
Excellent.
The work that Daniela is doing, we'll never be able to definitely pinpoint how it affects the students. But I remember we had one actor in a play called Next Stop, and he was a terrible stutterer. He really, it was difficult for him to speak, but he could sing perfectly. And he was in the play, also written by Carmen Rivera, where he sang doo-wop. And you never knew anything was wrong with him. But in the question and answer period afterwards, when the students would ask a question and he would answer, you would notice it, and so profoundly. So with her work in the schools, with these special students, the fact that they can sing or remember movements is remarkable. And I hope one day we can claim that Repertorio has helped them a little bit in terms of in their development. But the mind is such a fantastic thing. And song is a big, important element of helping these students.
Absolutely. So we got to talk about Carmen Rivera some more. So so before we do, and Allison, I know you're ready to jump in. I see the excitement all over your face, but I just want to say, for me, visiting the theater at 17 years old with my Spanish class, shout out to Senora Bierman, Elena Bierman, an amazing Spanish teacher and one of my favorite people in the world. Visiting that theater and seeing that performance of Irma, 17, over 20 years ago, was a magical experience. And I'm sure you've gotten similar feedback from many other students who have visited. And I want to hear you talk about what is it that makes the students' experience at Repertorio so magical. And I know you said that sometimes you don't know the impact theater is having on the student, but in Carmen's case, you do. And I want you guys to talk more about that.
Right. I first want to say that a lot of teachers right now, when they were students themselves, they came, just like you did, with their class to see a play at Repertorio, and now they're teaching Spanish and they're bringing their students. So we've seen that generational thing.
I mean, that's powerful.
Very powerful, very powerful. And Carmen Rivera was one of our first teaching artists as well. Her and her husband Cándido Tirado, also a playwright, they've done some teaching artist work for us. And in the beginning, they were kind of explaining how to deal with the Department of Education and what happens when you go into a school and so on. So we got to talking, and she said, well, when I was in high school, Robert was giving his post-performance speech. So he does a little Q&A after the performance. The actors introduce themselves and the country of their origin, which is very powerful experience for Latina kids to see somebody, that person's from the Dominican Republic like me, or Cuba, Venezuela, Argentina, Puerto Rico, whatever it is. That's powerful in itself. But she remembers sitting there, and he says, we care about what you think about. Your voices are important, and maybe someday you too can write a play. And she always had that in her head, and it opened up something in her. And lo and behold, she wrote La Gringa, which is the longest off-Broadway Spanish language theater piece. I think 28 years and going strong because it's so universal. But that's part of the impact, is somebody saying you can do it and that you're valuable.
The impact. I mean, that's the most beautiful thing in the world to me. She attended a performance at Repertorio in high school. She heard some words from you, Robert, that inspired her to write a play. She wrote a play which is performed at Repertorio. It's been playing for the last 28 years. Think of the countless students who have attended and seen it. The individual with special needs you mentioned, who I think you said performed in it. I mean, what are you thinking? What is it like to have that kind of impact?
It's what makes me happy. What makes me go into theater, because this is, you can cut this out, but when I went to Czechoslovakia, and a friend was the cultural attaché in the American consulate, and she sent us to a theater that was very popular in Czechoslovakia. I had no idea what they were saying on stage, and it was a long play. It was about 2.5 hours, but the theater was packed. And it was during the communist regime. And apparently the play had such a resounding effect on the people that were in the audience. And I was so jealous because most American theater didn't have that resonance, but at Repertorio, it does. And Codman's play has lasted this long because it really touches every Latino or every immigrant child, because it's such a universal story of anybody who's ever immigrated to the United States, but especially Latinos. And that's why it's lasted 28 years, because the audience gets so involved in it. And even audiences who are studying Spanish, they come out with a new realization of what it means to be the child of immigrants. It's not always easy. It brings its own problems, and they're made aware of something that they haven't thought about. So Repertorio does two things. It instructs people, or at least introduces them to what problems children of immigrants may have, but also for the children of immigrants, it's them on stage. It is their story on stage. And when you see the reaction to it, because when I go up after a performance with the students, I ask, did you enjoy it? And there's always a resounding yes, and they love the uncle in the play. And when I ask them, well, write the next act of the play, what happens to these students, or to the characters after the play ends, as sort of a writing exercise. And I say, do the young boy and the young girl, do they get married? Would they live in San Juan, Puerto Rico? Would they live in New York? Does the uncle who dies at the end of the play come back from the dead? And, to get them thinking about, there is a process. Don't let the play end as it is now. Imagine what could be, write about it, and hopefully they will write new plays about their own experiences.
I love that.
We had a residency that was based on La Gringa, and what came out of it was the class wrote La Gringa 2, which was, instead of the main character going to Puerto Rico, it was her cousin who has to come to New York to look for work, which is all, it came from the play itself. And we've also had some not sequels but prequels. It was the aunt and the uncle on their first date, which I thought was hilarious, and of course his car breaks down, because that's one of the comical themes of the play. So the students, once given an opportunity, they really they run with it. They run with their imagination, and it's great.
So cool. Does anyone have any thoughts about how educators can be using theater as a learning process in ways that they may not be doing currently?
Oh, definitely. Theater, besides from being good for creative writing, public speaking, collaborating, it's just fun. And I don't think any of these residencies that we do, the students look on them as work, because they may fear them at first if they're shy, but once they get into it and they see that the project comes from them, it's not really imposed on them, because a lot of times they decide what they're going to dramatize, whether it's something original that they write, something that's based on maybe something that they're reading in that class or another class, because they take novels and write at least a scene based on a part of the novel, if not the whole novel. So it's much more collaborative, and they have much more input, which ordinarily in classroom work they don't have. It's usually from the teacher to them. Here in the theater and the residencies, they have as much input as the teacher or the teaching artists have. In fact, we listen to the students. The only time that we didn't was in the second year we were in a school. the teaching artist, Ricardo Barber, asked them, well, what would you like to adapt now or do for the next time? And the students said, Greece. And the teacher said, no, we have to do something a little bit more Latino. And it made me realize after that, in the world culture, Greece is Latino, but not for that moment.
Allison, was there anything that you wanted to add?
No, I think you encapsulated that really well. And yes, allowing the students to create a scene, even if it's, okay, we're going to do it based on La Gringa or whatever, they have ownership of the work because it's coming from them, and we try to give them artistic freedom, and they really work hard to make something cohesive.
To the extent you haven't discussed this already, how can theater goals be tied to broader education goals in a student's program?
Yeah, as we said earlier, when you're talking about working together, groups of 4 or 5, they're taking a lot of responsibility to each other to write the scene, memorize the scene, perform the scene. So and again, we use those 5 W's to talk about putting a character together.
Who, what, when, why,
where, right? And so that's the building block. So they're really digging deep into the literacy, making the scene plausible, memorizing the lines, working together, directing each other. So those are definitely activities that lend itself to working on projects down the line, whether in high school, in college, in a work situation, and again, making them feel successful. We can't memorize it. Okay, so we're going to do a staged reading. You're going to have the script in front of you, but we're going to say things with intention, and we're going to make the scene fly. So,
I don't know if you've seen the Broadway show How to Dance in Ohio. It closed recently, a little bit earlier than it should have, but it seems to have sparked a movement for adapting theater to special needs individuals, which is beautiful to see. Do you have any thoughts about how more theater can be made accessible to special needs individuals?
I think, like everything that we've done, we need to work with individuals and to instruct us and how to do it. I know that one of the things is to quiet everything down so as not to create noise and stimulation. But I think that's the next step in the Repertorio's process, is to do special performances that are curated in a way by professionals in the field who can help us. Because, to be very truthful, we're just at a learning stage in that.
What are your plans for expanding Repertorio's reach, learning more, so more schools and students can benefit from what the theater has to offer?
Well, we've just rebranded our website, refurbished our theater, and we're always constantly reaching out to the schools, letting them know what we have to offer. And one of the things that we'll be doing in the next year is creating a new video regarding the Dignidad program, specifically the residency program. And we have one, but it's so old, more than 10 years old. Education changes, like the verbiage, what's current, keeping it current. And I think we can include the work that we're doing out in Staten Island. It's the first school that we have that is specific to students with special needs. And I met the assistant principal at a fair. It was the teachers go to write a grant to get the services that they need. So, this was something that just happened, and we're learning as we go. And I recommend that other theater companies, if they don't have this kind of program, to educate themselves with the schools that do have this student population. They will tell you what they need, and you adapt. Any school we go into, we're adapting to who's in the room.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Before we wrap up, where can our listeners learn more about Repertorio and its efforts to expand its reach to more students?
Definitely our website. We have all our programming listed there. A whole section on education.
And what's the
Repertorio? It's www.repertorio.nyc.
And you can call Allison directly at the theater at 212-225-9954.
50.
Okay. And Allison can help you in terms of developing a program for your class.
Okay. Robert, Allison, Daniela, thank you so much for joining me here today. I can't really express in words how much Repertorio has meant to me personally. In addition to the wonderful artistic work that you produce, I'm grateful for the ways in which you seek to make theater accessible to students and to adapt your productions to the special needs population. And I'm looking forward to continued partnership in the future and many more exciting accomplishments that lie ahead.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Curious Incident, a podcast for special needs families. Don't forget to subscribe for a new episode every month. For more resources and helpful information, check out our website and blog at dayanlawfirm.com. This podcast provides general information which is not intended to and does not constitute legal advice. You should not rely on this information for any purpose. For legal counsel, you should consult with an attorney to discuss your specific circumstances. Your listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship between you and the law offices of Adam Dayan, PLLC. No attorney-client relationship is established unless a retainer agreement has been executed between the client and the law offices of Adam Dayan. This podcast may constitute attorney advertising. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. Any guests featured or resources mentioned on this podcast are for information purposes and are not endorsed by the law offices of Adam Dayan, PLLC.